Behind John Ford's Technicolor masterpiece lurked feuding artists, sleeping dogs, fake thunderstorms, and Hollywood's most expensive four-legged star who had his own stunt double. From Victor McLaglen's embarrassing line flubs to John Wayne's surprise cake ceremony, this cavalry classic hides secrets more colorful than Monument Valley itself. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Fact 1. Ford didn't want John Wayne. When John Ford began planning She Wore a Yellow Ribbon in 1948, he had one thing crystal clear in his mind. He absolutely did not want John Wayne for the leading role of Captain Nathan Brittles. This might sound shocking today, considering that Ford and Wayne would go on to create some of the most iconic westerns in cinema history together. But at the time, Ford had serious doubts about whether Wayne could handle such a demanding character. The main problem wasn't Wayne's acting ability in general, but rather the specific challenge this role presented. Captain Brittles was written as a 60-year-old cavalry officer on the verge of retirement, a man weathered by decades of frontier service and personal loss. Wayne, however, was only 41 years old when the film was being cast, meaning he would need to convincingly portray a character who was nearly 20 years his senior. Ford worried that Wayne simply didn't have the emotional range or maturity to pull off such a complex aging character. Ford's concerns went beyond just the age difference. The role of Captain Brittles required an actor who could convey deep melancholy, wisdom earned through hardship, and the quiet dignity of a man facing the end of his career. Up to that point, Wayne had primarily been known for playing younger, more straightforward, heroic characters. Ford wasn't convinced that the big, imposing actor could tap into the vulnerable, reflective qualities that Brittles demanded. According to industry reports from that time, Argosy Pictures was actually negotiating with Charles Bickford to play the lead role instead of Wayne. Ford was exploring other options and seemed determined to find someone else for what would become one of Wayne's most celebrated performances. The director's initial reluctance would soon change dramatically, but at this early stage, John Wayne was definitely not John Ford's first choice for Captain Nathan Brittles. Fact 2. Red River changed everything. The complete turnaround in John Ford's opinion of John Wayne happened because of a single movie performance that blew the legendary director's mind. In 1948, Wayne starred in Howard Hawks' western Red River, where he played Thomas Dunson, a ruthless and aging cattle rancher who becomes increasingly tyrannical during a massive cattle drive. This role was unlike anything Wayne had done before, requiring him to portray a complex, morally ambiguous character who starts as a hero, but gradually becomes the antagonist of his own story. When Ford saw Wayne's performance in Red River, he was genuinely shocked by what he witnessed on screen. Wayne had managed to convey layers of psychological complexity, showing a man's descent into obsession and cruelty while still maintaining the character's underlying humanity. The role demanded that Wayne age convincingly throughout the film and display emotional depth that went far beyond his typical heroic persona. Ford realized that Wayne had grown significantly as an actor and could handle much more challenging material than he had previously given him credit for. Ford's reaction was immediate and characteristically blunt. According to multiple sources who were present when Ford first saw the film, the director exclaimed, "I didn't know the big son of a bitch could act." This crude but heartfelt admission revealed just how surprised Ford was by Wayne's dramatic growth as a performer. The profanity-laced comment was typical of Ford's rough speaking style, but it also showed genuine respect and amazement at what Wayne had accomplished. Red River had been filmed before Fort Apache but was released just before She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, which meant Ford had the perfect opportunity to see this new side of Wayne's abilities right when he needed to make his casting decision. Wayne's portrayal of the aging, complicated Dunson proved to Ford that he could absolutely handle the role of the 60-year-old Captain Brittles, completely changing the director's mind about his leading man. Fact 3. Wayne got a congratulatory cake. When the cameras stopped rolling on the final day of filming She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, John Ford did something completely unexpected that revealed just how impressed he was with John Wayne's performance. Instead of simply shaking hands or giving a typical wrap-up speech, Ford surprised Wayne by presenting him with a specially made cake that carried a message no one saw coming. Written across the top of the cake in frosting were 4 simple words: "You're an actor now." This gesture was extraordinary for several reasons, starting with the fact that John Ford was not known for grand sentimental displays or public praise. Ford had a reputation as a tough, demanding director who rarely handed out compliments, especially to actors he had worked with many times before. He was more likely to bark orders or deliver sharp criticism than to acknowledge someone's growth as a performer. For Ford to go to the trouble of having a cake made with such a personal message was completely out of character and showed just how genuinely moved he was by what Wayne had accomplished. The message itself was particularly significant because it represented Ford's official recognition that Wayne had evolved beyond being just a movie star or action hero. By saying, "You're an actor now," Ford was acknowledging that Wayne had developed the skills and emotional range to handle complex, demanding roles that required real dramatic ability. This was Ford's way of admitting that his initial doubts about Wayne's capabilities had been completely wrong. The cake ceremony also marked a turning point in the professional relationship between the two men. While they had worked together successfully before, this moment represented Ford's acceptance of Wayne as a serious dramatic performer who could be trusted with the most challenging material. Wayne himself treasured this recognition from Ford, and the role of Captain Brittles would go on to become one of his most beloved performances, proving that Ford's faith in his newfound acting abilities was completely justified. Fact 4. The storm scene was real. One of the most visually stunning sequences in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon features the cavalry riding through Monument Valley as dramatic lightning streaks across dark storm clouds. But what audiences don't realize is that this breathtaking scene was captured during an actual dangerous thunderstorm that erupted while they were filming. The crew was shooting a routine scene of soldiers on horseback crossing the desert when Mother Nature decided to provide her own special effects in the form of a massive storm rolling across the Arizona landscape. When cinematographer Winton Hoke saw the approaching storm clouds and lightning, his first instinct was to protect his expensive Technicolor cameras by packing them up immediately. Hoke knew that filming in such conditions would be nearly impossible due to the rapidly decreasing light, and more importantly, he was genuinely concerned about safety, since the metal camera equipment could potentially act as lightning rods if the storm passed directly over them. Any responsible cinematographer would have called for the crew to take cover and wait for the weather to pass. John Ford, however, had completely different ideas about what they should do. When he saw the dramatic storm clouds building on the horizon, Ford recognized an incredible opportunity to capture something truly spectacular that no studio could ever recreate. He immediately ordered Hoke to keep the cameras rolling and continue filming, despite the cinematographer's strong objections about the dangerous conditions and technical difficulties they would face. The result was one of the most iconic and memorable sequences in Western cinema history, with the cavalry silhouetted against the storm-darkened sky, as real lightning bolts illuminated the landscape around them. Ford's risky decision to keep filming during the actual storm paid off enormously, creating images that were so striking they helped Hoke win the Academy Award for Best Cinematography the following year, even though he had been reluctant to shoot the scene in the first place. Fact 5. Hoke filed an official complaint. Winton Hoke was so furious about being forced to film during the dangerous thunderstorm that he took the extraordinary step of filing a formal written complaint against John Ford with the American Society of Cinematographers, the professional organization that represented camera operators and directors of photography in Hollywood. This was not just a casual gripe or behind-the-scenes grumbling, but an official grievance that went on record with the industry's most important cinematography guild. Filing such a complaint was a serious matter that could have significant professional consequences for everyone involved. The American Society of Cinematographers was responsible for maintaining safety standards and professional practices in the film industry, and they took allegations of unsafe working conditions very seriously. For Hoke to go through the formal process of documenting his complaint meant that he genuinely believed Ford had put the crew in danger and violated accepted standards of professional conduct on a movie set. In his complaint, Hoke argued that Ford had forced him to continue filming under conditions that were both technically impossible and physically dangerous. He maintained that there was insufficient natural light to properly expose the Technicolor film stock, and more critically, that the metal camera equipment posed a real lightning strike hazard to everyone in the vicinity. Hoke felt that Ford had prioritized getting dramatic footage over the basic safety of his crew members. The irony of this situation became apparent the following year when Hoke won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography for She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, largely based on the very storm sequence he had complained about. The footage that Hoke had been forced to shoot against his will and professional judgment turned out to be the most acclaimed work of his career. Despite his anger and official protest, the dangerous filming conditions had produced some of the most beautiful and memorable images in Western cinema history, making Hoke the only member of the cast and crew to walk away with an Oscar. Fact 6. The Irish setter scene was improvised. One of the most charming moments in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon happened completely by accident when an unexpected four-legged visitor wandered onto the set and fell asleep right in the middle of where they were filming. The scene features Sergeant Quinn Cannon, played by Victor McLaglen, addressing his troops and warning them to watch them words, when he suddenly notices a dog lying on the ground near the assembled soldiers. Without missing a beat, McLaglen's character asks who owns the dog, and when no one answers, he declares, "Nice dog, Irish setter." What makes this moment so special is that absolutely none of it was planned or written in the original script. The dog was actually an unnamed pet belonging to one of the local Navajo people who lived in the Monument Valley area where they were filming. During the setup for what was supposed to be a straightforward military scene, this friendly dog simply wandered into the shot and decided to take a nap right where the cameras were rolling. Rather than stopping production to remove the animal, John Ford saw an opportunity to add some spontaneous humor to the scene. Ford immediately decided to incorporate the sleeping dog into the action, directing McLaglen to improvise some dialogue that would acknowledge the unexpected visitor. This kind of on-the-spot creativity was typical of Ford's directing style, as he was always looking for ways to make his scenes feel more natural and lived in. The fact that an Irish character like Quincannon would identify any dog as an Irish setter, regardless of its actual breed, added a perfect touch of character-based humor. The scene works so well because it feels completely authentic and unforced, which makes sense since it essentially was real life happening in front of the cameras. The sleeping dog's presence adds a touch of everyday military life that you simply can't script, and McLaglen's improvised response perfectly captures his character's personality while creating a memorable moment that audiences still enjoy today. Fact 7. McLaglen kept messing up his lines. While the improvised dog scene in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon turned out to be one of the film's most memorable moments, getting it right on camera proved to be much more challenging than anyone expected, because Victor McLaglen simply could not remember what kind of dog he was supposed to identify. Even though John Ford had decided that Sergeant Quincannon should call the sleeping animal an Irish setter to match his character's Irish background, McLaglen kept forgetting this direction and saying the wrong thing every single time they rolled the cameras. Take after take, McLaglen would deliver his lines perfectly until he got to the part where he was supposed to identify the dog's breed, and then he would confidently declare, "Nice dog, Cocker Spaniel," instead of the Irish setter that Ford wanted. This might seem like a minor detail, but Ford was particular about getting his scenes exactly right, and he knew that having an Irish character identify a dog as an Irish breed would be much funnier and more fitting for Quincannon's personality than calling it a Cocker Spaniel. The repeated mistakes became increasingly frustrating for everyone involved, especially since the rest of the improvised scene was working so well. McLaglen was a veteran actor who had worked with Ford many times before, but for some reason, he just could not get this one simple line to stick in his memory. Each time he said Cocker Spaniel, Ford would call cut and patiently explain again that the line should be Irish setter, but McLaglen would inevitably make the same mistake on the next attempt. The fact that they had to do multiple takes of what was essentially a spontaneous moment makes the final version even more remarkable. By the time McLaglen finally got the line right and called the dog an Irish setter, the scene had been rehearsed enough times that it felt natural and effortless, even though it had actually required considerable patience and persistence to capture properly on film. Fact 8. Steele the horse was Hollywood royalty. The magnificent sorrel stallion that Ben Johnson rode in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon was no ordinary movie horse, but rather one of the most famous and sought-after animal actors in all of Hollywood during the 1940s and 50s. Steele was owned by Clarence "Fat" Jones, who operated one of the most successful horse rental businesses in the movie industry, and this particular horse had already appeared in films with some of the biggest stars of the era, including John Wayne, Gregory Peck, and Clark Gable. What made Steele so special was his unique combination of being both visually stunning and remarkably well-behaved on camera. The horse was known for being extremely quiet and cooperative during filming, which made even inexperienced riders look like accomplished horsemen when they were mounted on him. His flashy appearance and calm temperament made him the perfect choice for close-up shots and scenes that required precise timing, since directors could count on Steele to perform consistently without causing problems or delays. Fat Jones had built his entire business around Steele's popularity, but he was also a shrewd businessman who knew how to maximize his profits from his star horse. Whenever a movie studio wanted to use Steele for their production, Jones would insist on an all-or-nothing deal that required them to rent every other horse needed for the film exclusively from his stable. This meant that if a production wanted Steele for their leading man, they had to hire all the background horses, cavalry mounts, and any other equine actors from Fat Jones as well. This business arrangement made Steele incredibly valuable to Jones, essentially turning one exceptional horse into a guarantee of much larger contracts. Ben Johnson had a special connection to Steele because he was married to Carol, who was Fat Jones's daughter, which gave him priority access to ride the famous horse. Steele had been ridden by major stars in films like Tall in the Saddle and Yellow Sky, making his appearance in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon part of a distinguished Hollywood career. Fact 9. Steele had his own stunt double. Even though Steele was one of Hollywood's most accomplished movie horses, he wasn't actually the horse audiences saw performing the most thrilling and dangerous riding sequences in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Just like human actors who use stunt doubles for risky scenes, Steele had his own equine stand-in named Bingo, who took over whenever the action required high-speed galloping, dangerous jumps, or other potentially hazardous stunts that could put the valuable star horse at risk. Bingo was specifically chosen as Steele's double because he looked remarkably similar to the famous stallion, with the same sorrel coloring and general build that would fool audiences on camera. However, where Steele excelled at calm, controlled performances and close-up work, Bingo was bred for speed and athletic ability. This thoroughbred was an absolutely spectacular galloper who could run at full speed with an extravagant, flowing gait that looked incredible on film, making him perfect for the sweeping action sequences that Ford wanted to capture across Monument Valley. The switch between the two horses was seamless because both animals were so well trained and similar in appearance. When Ben Johnson needed to deliver dialogue or perform in close-up shots, he would be mounted on the reliable and calm Steele, who could be counted on to stand perfectly still and behave predictably during filming. But when the script called for Johnson's character to race across the desert at breakneck speed or navigate treacherous terrain, the cameras would be rolling on Bingo instead. This arrangement protected Steele from potential injury while still allowing the production to capture the most exciting and visually impressive riding sequences possible. Bingo's incredible speed and agility combined with Johnson's expert horsemanship created some of the most memorable action scenes in the film. The fact that audiences never realized they were watching two different horses is a testament to how well the switch was executed and how carefully both animals were trained for their specific roles in the production. Fact 10. Ford kept his brother on payroll. One of the most telling examples of John Ford's loyalty to family members happened during the filming of She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, when the director made sure his older brother Francis got paid for the entire 8-week production schedule, despite having only one tiny scene in the movie. Francis Ford appears briefly as Connolly, a barman working at the Fort Sutler's store, delivering just a few lines of dialogue in what amounts to less than a minute of screen time that could have easily been filmed in a single day. The role was so small that any competent actor could have memorized the lines, shown up for a few hours of filming, collected a day's pay, and been done with the job in less than a week. Francis certainly didn't need 8 weeks to prepare for or film such a minor part, and keeping him on the payroll for the entire production was completely unnecessary from a practical standpoint. However, John Ford made the deliberate decision to pay his brother for the full duration of filming, essentially giving him a paid vacation in Monument Valley. This arrangement reveals something important about John Ford's character and his approach to taking care of the people he cared about. Even though Ford had a reputation for being demanding and sometimes harsh with actors and crew members, he also had a strong sense of family loyalty that extended to making sure his relatives were financially secure. Francis Ford had been working in Hollywood for many years, often in small character roles, and John was clearly using his position as a successful director to help support his older brother. The fact that Ford was willing to spend the production company's money to keep Francis on salary for 8 weeks shows just how much power and influence the director had at this point in his career. Ford was confident enough in his standing with the studio that he could justify this kind of generous arrangement without worrying about criticism from executives who might question the expense. Fact 11. John Agar was going through a messy divorce. While John Agar was filming She Wore a Yellow Ribbon in Monument Valley during the fall of 1948, he was simultaneously dealing with the very public and emotionally draining collapse of his marriage to one of America's most beloved stars, Shirley Temple. The couple's relationship had been deteriorating for months, and Temple had already filed for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty earlier that year, making Agar's personal life a constant source of media attention and gossip column speculation. The timing couldn't have been more challenging for Agar's career, as he was trying to establish himself as a serious actor while his private life was being dissected in newspapers and fan magazines across the country. Agar and Temple had married in 1945 when she was just 17 years old, and he was 24, and their fairy tale romance had quickly turned into a nightmare plagued by Agar's drinking problems and reported infidelities. Temple had given birth to their daughter Linda Susan in 1948. But even the arrival of their child couldn't save the troubled marriage. During the filming of She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Agar was essentially living under a cloud of scandal and uncertainty about his future. The divorce proceedings were ongoing throughout the production, with lawyers and court dates competing for his attention alongside his professional obligations to John Ford and the film. The stress of the situation was made worse by the fact that Agar's acting career had largely been built on his connection to Temple, and many people in Hollywood were wondering whether he would be able to continue getting roles once the marriage was officially over. The divorce was finally finalized in December of 1949, just a few weeks after She Wore a Yellow Ribbon was released to theaters. This meant that audiences were watching Agar play a romantic lead on screen at the exact same time that his real-life marriage was officially ending, creating an uncomfortable irony that followed the actor throughout the film's promotional campaign. Fact 12. Failed TV pilot in 1958. Nearly a decade after She Wore a Yellow Ribbon became a hit in theaters, television producers decided to try bringing the cavalry western format to the small screen with an ambitious pilot episode that would have turned the movie's characters and setting into a weekly television series. In 1958, James Warner Bella, who had written the original short stories that inspired the film, created a television pilot called Command that was intended to capture the same spirit and appeal of John Ford's acclaimed movie for home audiences. The pilot featured veteran character actor Everett Sloane taking over the role of Captain Brittles, the aging cavalry officer that John Wayne had made famous in the original film. Sloane was an experienced performer who had appeared in Orson Welles' productions and numerous other films and television shows, making him a logical choice to anchor what producers hoped would become a successful ongoing series. Playing opposite him as Lieutenant Cohill was Ben Cooper, a young actor who would take on the part that John Agar had played in the movie. The concept seemed promising on paper, as television westerns were becoming increasingly popular during the late 1950s, with shows like Gunsmoke and Have Gun Will Travel drawing large audiences every week. The idea of adapting She Wore a Yellow Ribbon for television made sense because the film's military setting and ensemble cast of characters could easily support multiple storylines and ongoing adventures that would work well in an episodic format. Unfortunately, despite having the involvement of the original writer and experienced actors in the lead roles, Command failed to generate enough interest from network executives to be picked up as a regular series. The pilot was produced, but never led to additional episodes, leaving it as a forgotten footnote in television history. The failure of Command meant that She Wore a Yellow Ribbon would remain a standalone cinematic experience, rather than expanding into the television medium. Fact 13. The calendar error. One of the most glaring historical mistakes in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon involves a simple desk calendar that Captain Brittles uses to mark off the days until his retirement, but the calendar page shown on screen displays completely wrong information for when the movie is supposed to take place. The calendar reveals a month with 31 days that begins on a Wednesday, and when you check the actual calendar for 1876, the only month that matches this pattern is March, which creates a major problem with the film's timeline. The issue becomes obvious when you consider that the movie makes several direct references to the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General George Custer and his troops were killed by Native American forces. This famous battle took place on June 25, 1876, and the film clearly establishes that this event has recently occurred, with characters discussing how the news of Custer's defeat has reached the fort and is influencing current military decisions about dealing with potential Indian uprisings. If the calendar is showing March of 1876, then the Battle of Little Bighorn hasn't happened yet, since that historic conflict wouldn't take place for another 3 months. This creates an impossible situation where the characters are talking about reacting to an event that hasn't occurred according to the calendar that's visible on screen. Captain Brittles even mentions the battle specifically when he visits his wife's grave, saying they received sad news about Custer's death, which makes the March calendar completely inconsistent with the story. The correct calendar should have shown July of 1876, since the film indicates that Brittles is marking off days on the 5th of the month, and news of Custer's June 25th defeat would have realistically taken about a week to reach a remote cavalry outpost like Fort Stark. This kind of continuity error shows how even big-budget Hollywood productions could overlook important historical details when creating props that seemed simple but actually required careful attention to accuracy. Fact 14. Wayne's wrong Academy Award nomination. John Wayne received his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor in 1950 for his performance in Sands of Iwo Jima, but Wayne himself believed that the Academy had recognized the wrong movie and that his nomination should have gone to his work in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon instead. This wasn't just a casual preference or offhand comment, but a genuine conviction that Wayne held throughout his life about which performance truly deserved the honor and recognition from his peers in the film industry. Wayne's frustration with the Academy's choice makes perfect sense when you consider the vastly different types of performances he gave in these two films. In Sands of Iwo Jima, Wayne played Sergeant John Stryker, a tough Marine drill instructor who was essentially a variation on the strong, commanding characters he had been playing for years. While it was certainly a good performance, it didn't require Wayne to stretch very far beyond his established screen persona or demonstrate significant growth as an actor. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, on the other hand, presented Wayne with one of the most challenging roles of his entire career up to that point. Playing Captain Nathan Brittles required him to convincingly portray a man nearly 20 years older than himself, showing vulnerability, melancholy, and emotional depth that went far beyond anything he had previously attempted. The role demanded that Wayne convey the weight of years of military service, personal loss, and the bittersweet nature of approaching retirement, all while maintaining the dignity and authority of a respected commanding officer. Wayne considered Captain Brittles to be one of his favorite performances throughout his entire career, and he felt that the Academy had overlooked his most accomplished and demanding work in favor of a more conventional war movie role. The fact that Wayne remained proud of his work in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon for decades afterward shows just how much the role meant to him personally and professionally. Fact 15. Primitive living conditions. Despite having a budget of $1.6 million, which made She Wore a Yellow Ribbon one of the most expensive Western films ever produced at that time, the cast and crew had to endure surprisingly rough and uncomfortable living conditions during their 8 weeks of filming in the remote desert location of Monument Valley. The production company had spent enormous amounts of money on Technicolor cameras, elaborate costumes, and top-tier talent. But when it came to accommodating everyone during the lengthy shoot, the arrangements were shockingly basic and primitive. Most of the actors and crew members were housed in makeshift cabins that had dirt floors instead of proper wooden or concrete foundations, creating dusty, uncomfortable living spaces that were a far cry from the luxury accommodations that major Hollywood stars typically expected during film productions. These rough shelters provided minimal protection from the desert elements and offered very little in terms of comfort or privacy for people who were used to much better treatment on movie sets. The bathing facilities were even more challenging, consisting only of communal cold water drum showers that had to be shared among the entire production team. This meant that everyone from the leading actors to the camera operators had to take turns using the same basic washing setup, with no hot water available despite the often chilly desert nights in Monument Valley. The lack of individual bathrooms or private shower facilities created an unusual situation where Hollywood stars like John Wayne were essentially living like campers or military personnel in the field. John Wayne later romanticized these conditions in interviews, describing the experience as creating a special sense of camaraderie among the cast and crew, but most other participants remembered the primitive accommodations less fondly. The contrast between the film's massive budget and the Spartan living conditions shows how location shooting in remote areas during the late 1940s required significant personal sacrifices from everyone involved, regardless of their status in the Hollywood hierarchy.